Very good. All right, so this is not in your notes specifically, just kind of find a happy spot on your notes to write this down. But let's go through this. So what we're going to be talking about here, we so far have talked about the organization of these organisms. And, you've learned before about how you have these interactions like predator-prey, mutualism, commensalism, all that good stuff. But now what we're going to do is tie that all back in and talk about it in terms of energy. Specifically, how does energy flow through this said food chain, food web? And so the first thing we got to do is talk about the law of conservation of energy from before. We want to remember that when we talk about this in terms of photosynthesis, cell respiration back in physics, even back in chemistry, we know that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred, okay? We see this through chemical reactions. We see this through everything. And the same thing when we talk about energy going through a particular ecosystem. So we talk about organisms in the ecosystem. We put them into two categories. You're either a producer or a consumer. Now, producer, another name it goes by is what's called autotrophs, all right? These are organisms that are involved with photosynthesis. So if they are involved with photosynthesis, what's the organelle that they're going to primarily be using for the transfer of energy? Well, if they're going through photosynthesis, it's going to be that of chloroplasts, okay? And so what they're going to do, their role in the ecosystem is to convert the light energy from the sun into chemical energy. That chemical energy, is in terms of glucose, okay? And if we remember, we take that glucose into cell respiration and convert it into usable energy. Now, last time I checked, none of you could go outside right now, get into the sun, and feel like you've gotten a bunch of energy, right? Not possible. So what you all are what we call consumers. Another name it goes by is heterotrophs. This is where you have to act as kind of a predator, almost. You have to, well, you are a predator. You have to eat other organisms to get that particular energy. And so we're going to, you've learned before about these two things. Let's look at it in terms of a trophic level. So we are now on your notes. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right. So a couple of things we got to remind ourselves about energy. First one, all organisms need energy to carry out life processes. This is one of the characteristics of life. It is essential. For organisms that are not producers, aka the consumers, they have to obtain energy by eating. Okay, you have to eat another organism to be able to get that particular energy. And these are called predatory relationships. Now, let's look at a particular type of food chain, all right? And this is going to be a little bit of review, especially from middle school, all right? When looking at any kind of ecosystem, you have these many organisms that have a particular role or job. We call that a niche. But when we take a look at this, we can see that each organism serves a particular purpose in here, okay? So in this particular realm, we see a food chain where we have grass, grasshoppers, mice, snakes, and a hawk, okay? When we talk about it in terms of food chain, we give them specific names. Go ahead and write this down in your notes. So producers are, again, going to be the ones that start off all of the food chain and food webs. Then we have the primary consumer, then secondary, tertiary, and quaternary, okay? Remember, whenever we look at any kind of arrow, the arrow is representing the direction the energy is going. And so producers doesn't have anything before it because, again, these producers are taking that light energy and converting it into chemical energy. And that energy then gets passed down to primary, secondary, all the rest of the consumers. Now, as we're eating these organisms, the question is what type or what amount of energy is actually being passed, okay? And that's going to lead us into our next discussion. Now, we got to remember when we're taking a look at this, this is not only passing energy. When you eat an organism, what are you also eating? You also have those nutrients. Remember, in terms of the nutrients, this process of eating and everything like that, well, this is going to help recycle minerals. So remember, this is how we get things like phosphorus, nitrogen, those types of things necessary for all the different types of macromolecules we have. Now, as we look at any kind of food chain or food web, one of the things we want to ponder is what happens if one of the organisms tend to disappear. So if mice were to disappear, who would be directly affected? If I'm looking at the example on the board here. The snake would. How? Absolutely. What about the crickets, though? Yeah, we would expect the cricket population to increase and the snake population to decrease as well. Exactly. Here's the thing. Whenever you mess up a food chain or food web, that's going to cause a cascading effect. Now, which trophic level, if they were to go, would be the most serious? The snake? Okay, so that means it's going to be that hawk. But I might be looking for one other trophic level. If this one disappeared, then the whole thing would just go. Yeah. If the producers are not there, then there is no energy for anything else. You have to have the producers to start the ecosystem. Without it, no energy can be converted into a usable amount. And so if you look at any kind of biome that is out there, okay, we got to remember that without the producers, there can't be much life that exists there. So we rely upon these food chains and food webs to really not only transfer the energy, but again, this is how we get those nutrients, as phosphorus, as nitrogens, as sulfur, those types of things. Now, here comes a problem. We have the transfer of energy, but it becomes a little bit tricky, okay? And this is where we get what's called the 10% rule, okay? So the 10% rule, I'm going to write this down on the board here. Okay. The 10% rule states that only 10% of energy gets passed from one trophic level to the next. Okay, please put that down. Okay, that is going to be very important. When we talk about the 10% rule, only 10% of energy gets passed down. So if I was going to draw what we call an energy pyramid, this shows the relative amount of energy that is passed down through each trophic level. Here we have producers, Here we have primary consumers. We have secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Now, here's the thing. Let's say the producers, we have a set amount of calories. So let's say that here we have 100,000 kilocalories. And remember, whenever you look at food, it has a nutrition label. The nutrition label is going to tell you how much potential energy that has. Now, as we go up from one trophic level to the next, only 10% of that total energy gets passed. So when that primary consumer eats that producer, if I have 100,000 kilocalories, how many calories is this primary consumer going to have? What's 10% of 100,000? 10,000. Now, 90% is lost. Why? Why is so much of that energy being lost? It seems like such a waste on average. What is happening to that energy? Well,
every time because it requires energy for the next consumer to get that food and use that to determine if it's
yeah, exactly. There's many factors that go into this, all right? So first one is reasons, and you want to put this down in your notes. One is going to be metabolism. Okay, organisms have to go generally hunt, get their food, and they use energy to eat the food, all of that good stuff. Okay, another one is not all the energy, not all of the organism is eaten, is another one. Okay. But a lot of it's done because metabolism. The other one would be loss of heat. Is another one. So as we go from one trophic level to the next, we're always going to take out 10% that's only passed. So if this is 10,000, that means this next one's going to be 1,000 kilocalories. The next one is going to be then 100 kilocalories. And then finally, we get to quaternary, 10 kilocalories. So by the time we get up to that point where we go all the way up, by the time it gets to that quaternary level, it has only a fraction of the amount of energy originally from the producers. So what are these organisms that are in this trophic level having to do most of their time? Well, they're only getting limited amount of energy. They have to spend most of their time trying to find food as a result of it. So that means which trophic level would we find the most amount of organisms at? Per area. If we think about, let's say, a square mile around the school, which type of organism would we find most of? Which trophic level? Plants, bugs, mice, snakes, birds, us. Plants, right? We would definitely see a lot more plants because, well, it definitely has the most amount, and it has to supply the energy to all these other trophic levels as well. Okay, so that creates a particular problem. Let's go back to the notes here. Give you a second to fill this in here. So energy does not transfer, again, because most of the loss to heat are used by the organism, aka metabolism. Whenever energy is transferred from one organism to the next, much of it's lost to heat. Okay, we experience this all the time. You are producing heat as we speak. Most of you are recording temperatures about 98.6 degrees. The temperature of the room is roughly about 72. So you are expelling 20 degrees of heat from your body compared to the rest. And that's all just being released into the environment, and it's going to radiate out into space. If you look on the next page, you have this nice little pyramid and everything. I would write this down. Put these examples on there because you will be asked to calculate here in just a bit. Okay. All right. Now, let's look on that page right there, and it says C. Why do some biomes, type of ecosystems, have more organisms than others? Provide some examples. All right. Well, let's come back to this. So first of all, we call biomass the amount of living tissue or organism at every trophic level. We take a look at this particular pyramid here. As we go up the trophic levels, the amount of biomass decreases. So the greatest amount of biomass is going to be producers, and then it's going to go down dramatically. Okay. And again, this makes sense because the producers are going to have the most amount of energy, and they have to be able to supply all the other trophic levels as well. All right. So we look at C. Why do some biomes, type of ecosystems, have more life than others? Well, we kind of have to remember, okay, that when we look at these different biomes, we have to look at the amount of producers. The producers is really what determines how much life can exist on there. And so if we look at things like the desert versus the rainforest, we definitely see the amount of producers is greatly different. And so that's going to affect how many organisms can exist in the upper trophic levels. Okay. Before we move on, what questions do you have for me about any of this? Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to go into Schoology for me, please, and open up Go with the Flow Lab. All right. Okay, so if you open up today's folder, you're going to see Go with the Flow. Now, because of everybody taking tests and all that good stuff, we're not going to be able to actually conduct the lab. So instead, we're going to take a look at the data, and that'll give you an opportunity to work through it. All right. So let's look at the background nice and loud. Go ahead and pull that up. Lily, can you read us the background nice and loud, please? Everybody else, please follow along.
I can read it. My voice is like completely gone though. Is that like
It's okay, it's okay. Steve,
okay?
All right, Ava, help us out, please. Nice and loud.
Wait, did you call me?
I did, but it's okay. It's okay.
Sorry, my sound was like glitching up. I can read it if you want me to.
All right, you're all right. Go ahead, Ava. All right, very good. So originally what we would have done was we would have 9 liters of water starting off as our producers, okay? And so we would have an individual between 2 buckets have a cup that would have a hole in it. And the hole would let water out, representing the heat or energy loss per trophic level. So you can kind of see what happened to the amount of water that was left after how many trophic levels or links in the food chain there was, okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to calculate the percent efficiency. You don't need to do this column right here, all right? So just look at the percent efficiency. So to figure out the percent efficiency, you just take the amount of water left. So in this case, take 4,560, and you divide it by the initial amount, which is going to be 9,000, times it by 100. That gives you the percent, okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to figure out the percent efficiency for this, and then you're going to draw it out on a graph. So you can hand draw the graph and take a picture of it. You can go to kidzonegraphing.net, whatever you would like to use, all right? And then from that, you're then going to answer the questions that relate about this particular lab, all right? So go ahead, if you haven't already, write down the amount to the water, and then go ahead and start calculating and working through those problems. And so this time, if you're having trouble with anything, this is where you need to kind of be proactive and ask about what questions you have. All right. And before I let you loose on doing what you need to do, any questions? All right, let's go ahead and get started.